pieces pressed and cut apart, and the only alteration I really need to do on this one is this back leg. See how it cuts up? This shape is the opposite shape of the average rear end. So I'm going to redraw this, curve it down a little bit, and add a little fullness right down here where most of us have a seat. If you watched my pattern alteration video, I mentioned I couldn't find my hip curve. Well, I found it. We've been uncovering all kinds of interesting things, and here it is. So this pattern has 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's underwear. I'm going to double check that. All right, so it does have 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I want to make sure that the changes that I make are after the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here's my 1/4 inch at the side and my 1/4 inch down here. And anything I want to add needs to be between those two. And actually, I'm fine with this right here. It's right down here that I need to add the fullness. And I'm okay with this shape right there. So I'm just going to use this hip curve to add a little fullness like that. And then I'm going to smooth it out like this. And I don't want this little V intersection right here, so I want to make sure that I get a nice smooth shape. So I'm going to flip my curve over and even out my shape like that. So now this is going to be my new rear end. That's going to give me better coverage. This is about 5/8 of an inch. So that added 5/8 of an inch where I personally need it most. If you're flatter in the rear, you may not need this, but for me, it's important. So now I'm ready to cut this out on my actual size and go to the fabric. I just want to say this pattern actually had extra small through extra large in one. If you want to buy one pattern and preserve the integrity so you can make multiple sizes, get some tissue paper, lay it on top, and trace off each size individually. You've only paid for one pattern, $1 worth of tissue paper, and you'll have all of the sizes, extra small through extra large, taken care of. And then you can fold them up. This is my favorite way to store patterns that I've used a lot, or if I have lots of sizes of it, I will do this sort of thing. I'll even cut open and put my pattern envelope and glue it to the front. So, all right, so I have my 2 pieces laid out, folded on each end. This is the center. You can actually see the center fold line right there. And I'm ready to cut out my front and my back. And then here's my crotch lining and pattern next. First thing we're going to do is take this little crotch piece. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to serge the shorter raw edge. You can see the shape. This is the front, and this is the part that will not get stitched down. So we're just going to serge it so that we don't have a raw edge anymore. Ready to pin together. This is the front underwear, and it's pretty easy to tell because on this pattern it has a very long crotch line, and I'm going to lay down my lining piece like this on the inside. This is how it's going to look when it's sewn. It'll be on the inside, and this is the right edge. And then here's I'm doing this just so I can keep track of where everything goes. Here's the back. Now, if I were to sew it together just like this, so that I have my back, my front, and my crotch piece, when I open it up, I will have this seam will be exposed. I want that seam hidden. So what I'm going to do is actually take the crotch lining and sandwich it. So let's line up our 2 underwear pieces first. I'm going to put a couple pins in it just to hold it in place. And sometimes there's a little bit of stretching to be done. It depends on the pattern. This one they've kind of designed it out, but in a traditional pattern you need to stretch it a little bit for the fitting. And now we're going to take this, and I want to see the wrong side because I know it's going to flip over. So this is the wrong side. So I have right side lining against the wrong side of the back of the underwear, and then the right sides of the underwear are touching. So right sides together for the underwear, and then right side down for the lining on the back side. So the lining piece will be on the rear of the underwear. All right, and now we're going to serge it. This is how it looks. Front underwear, back underwear, right sides together. Lining piece, wrong side up, right side down, so that when it flips over, it'll be correct. And now we're ready to serge, and we're only going to serge this little short piece. Okay, this is how it looks. Now this is how it's going to fold up. And this is what's going to be on the inside of your underwear. On the back side, nice finished off seam. This is the right side, nice finished off seam. And then this is the lining that folds down. And I'm going to tell you, this is a really short lining. If I were designing this pattern, I would have made that lining come up a good 2 to 3 inches higher. And it would be easy to cut a new piece, and I might do that. If I like this pattern enough, I'm going to cut a new lining piece, because that's just not very much. Just saying. Okay, that's it for this part. We're ready to do our side seams. I'm going to just stick a pin in this so the lining stays in place. And now we're going to take our side seams, right sides together, and stitch them up. Side seam to side seam. And we're just going to sew those. Again, when I sew it, I want the right side on the front on top, right sides together. So I'm going to, this is the front of my underwear. Line these up. Stick a pin or two in it, just so it doesn't slide on me. This fabric is really nice. I really like it. It has a tiny bit of spandex in it, and you can tell it feels really nice. All right. Okay, if you're sewing this at your sewing machine, you'll just set this to a kind of small zigzag. Make sure you sew on the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now I have got one side seam. Here's the other side seam. The underwear are put together already. So if you wanted to try on your pattern and say, hey, does this fit? It doesn't have elastic in it yet, but you could tell right now if it's going to fit or not. All right, pinning the other side up, and we're ready to stitch. Okay, I have a pair of underwear. Okay, here's our underwear sewn together. This is the seam at the center back. This is how, or at the back, and this is how the crotch will fold forward like this, and it will be held down with the elastic here on the sides. So that's what's going to hold it down. So it's technically open here. You could top stitch that down if you want to. You'll have just a straight stitched, top stitched line that would show on the outside, and it wouldn't stretch, which is always an issue. So that's, I think, one of the reasons they do it this way when you don't have your separate pattern piece for the crotch. Next, we're going to do elastic. You can do a regular braided elastic. I prefer the picot edge, so I'm going to pull out some picot edged elastic and show you that next. This pattern has elastic guides for cutting your elastic lengths. I'm using picot edged elastic, and I have it in 2 widths. This is the wider width that I use for the waistband. And if you see, let me put it over the white so you can see. Can you see that little picot edge? That's actually going to peek out the top when it's finished being stitched. Most of this will be hidden, but you will see that little bit. And then this is the narrower elastic that I use for the legs. It's very soft and stretchy. So this is what we're going to use. If you don't have, it depends on your pattern, but most patterns will have something that'll tell you how long to cut your elastic. A lot of times I find that I like my elastic a little tighter, but since I'm doing the extra large size, and I don't cut this is the elastic guide, I don't cut it out exactly. You just need to lay your elastic across and measure it. So that's what I'm going to do. Here's the legs, here's the waist. And the nice thing about this one is it actually has your markings, because we do want to quarter our elastic. So I'm going to cut it out and then I'll show you what quartering means. Make sure when you're laying your elastic out that you don't stretch it to measure, that it just lays flat for measurement. If you stretch it, you're going to end up with way too tight of elastic. All right, if I know I'm going to make a pattern lots and lots of times, I go ahead and just measure what it is for the size that I need, and I write it on my pattern. And then the next time I don't have to fish out these pattern pieces. I can just look right up here and say, oh, I need to measure my leg elastic at 25 inches and be done. So I've gone ahead and written it down. I'm going to, after I sew them up and try it on, I'm going to see if I like that, if I need to fine tune it. Always on something like this, the first one is your tester to see how you like it, so you know what you need to do to make changes. I've laid my elastic on here because I was curious to see how much they've subtracted from the actual pattern measurement, the undergarment measurement, to the elastic. And for the waist, it's 4 inches. I haven't done the leg yet, but I'm going to measure it and find out too. And that just lets me know how much my elastic is going to stretch, which is something I like to know. So that's a good amount. I want it to be at least 2. 4 is probably perfect for this soft picot elastic, and you can see it's super stretchy. So 4 inches is not going to be too much at all. The next thing I do is I want to mark on my actual garment my center back and my center front. I already have the side seam is easy because there's a seam there, so I'm just marking center back and center front really quickly. If you did not mark it when you had the pattern laying on it, if you fold it so that you have side seam to side seam, and you don't want to stretch, but you just want to gently pull this out so you can see. And my side seams are lined up. That's going to be my center back. I'm going to put a little orange pin in the center back, and I'm going to put a purple pin in the center front, and that's just to help me know my front from my back, though you can tell pretty easily on a pattern like this, front from back, because the leg shape and the crotch piece and all of that. So now I've got this marked, and because the pattern piece for the elastic, if you wanted to, you could put pins in where it marked your side seams and so forth. I have my own little method that to me is faster, so I'm going to take my elastic and overlap it like that. Now you could go to your sewing machine if you wanted to, and you could actually zigzag this together, but I'm just going to overlap and pin, and I'm going to pin it to the right side of my underwear where it's overlapped in the center back. I always like to put my overlap either in the center back or on a side seam. Personally, the center back's my preferred place, because if you have this overlap and the bulk of the side seam, it starts to get bulky right there. So this is how I prefer to do it. So there's my center back, and then I'm just going to gently pull the elastic. And when it's pulled in half like this, this is now my center front. So I'm going to take this and pin that. And I'm putting the picot edges down. The raw or the straight edge is along the edge of the garment. So center front elastic to center front garment. And this is how you quarter any elastic, whether it's for legs or waists or necks or the wrist of an arm. Okay, so now I'm going to put my pins on top of each other and just pull the elastic. Again, I'm not stretching it. I'm just straightening it. And this little part is now going to go to the side seam. And when I do my side seam, you want to make sure you push the seam to the back. And I'm going to line those on top of each other and pin it. And now I'm going to do the other one. And now you can see I've got this much pinned in, and you can see it's not a ton that it pulls in. When you take out 4 inches, it's not as stretchy as you might think it would be. And now I'm going to pull this one over, do the same thing over here, making sure that my seam allowance is pushed to the back. And now I have it quartered, so I'm going to just show you. This is the inside of my garment, and the elastic is pinned to the inside. So when I stitch this, I'm going to start in the center back. Here's the center back. I'm going to take it to my serger. If you don't have a serger, you use your wide zigzag on your sewing machine, and I'm going to serge this edge down, and then when this folds up, you're going to just see that little black picot edge along the waist. And I'm going to do the same thing for the leg. So now to the serger. I'm taking my pinned edge, and the first thing I'm noticing is I've got to slide it in like this. Well, that pin is actually not facing the direction I want, so I'm going to hold it with my fingers and flip it so that the pin head is on this side. That's how I want it. Okay, so now I can just raise this up. Make sure the needles are up when you go to slide it in. I'm going to just slide this underneath. And when the needles are up, the feed dogs are up. And I want to make sure that I've got the overlap right underneath the needle. So before I even take the pin out and make sure the pin's not in the way, I'm going to sink the needles into that. So that's going to hold together that little overlap. Now if I yanked on this, I could pull my 2 pieces apart. So I don't want to do that. I want to take a couple stitches, and I'm going to make sure that the edge of my elastic is lined up with the edge of my fabric. And I'm just going to take a couple stitches without stretching so that I know that it's caught. Now, let me just pull this back so you can see. Can you see this down here? I'm going to stretch this just so that they match. I'm not going to overstretch it too much. I'm just going to stretch so that the elastic and the underwear are the same length. And I'm sewing right along the edge. We're not cutting anything off. All right, so this is how it looks. And right now, when I turn it up, see it's too long, but I will fix that when I do my top stitch. So when I go to top stitch it, I'm going to make sure it's the right length. But this is how it looks. This is where I started. You can see I actually got a skip stitch because I had my pin in the way. But it is caught and it's not going to pull apart. So there's my overlap. I'm not going to pull real hard on that part because I don't want any issues. I'm going to come back around and catch it so I don't have to worry too much about it. And we're just going to gently go all the way around, gently pulling and making sure that the seam allowance is pushed the correct direction. And I pinned all of these wrong. I'm going to just pull this one out. All right, so I'll see you at the other end. All right, my elastic is stitched. And when we flip to do our top stitch, it's going to, you're just going to barely see that little picot edge like that. I like the look of the black against the white. You can see it's still nice and stretchy. And now we're going to do the same thing for the leg. Quartering the leg is a little different because we have an unusual shaped opening. It curves out at the back and curves in at the front, whereas the waist is just a nice straight even hole. But if we were to mark this in half, if we have our side seam here, if I can get my fingers around it and I stretch this out, you can see that here in the crotch area is sort of the middle. So I've got my overlap pinned right there, and now I'm going to pin this at the side seam, again making sure that my seam is pushed to the back, my seam allowance. There we go. And then we're going to line these on top of each other. And I've just got this pin here, it's just holding down the crotch lining because of how it's sewn. It doesn't get stitched down until you do your elastic. So folding these two in half, and marking it. Now you could take your tape measure and measure this out and be really careful if you want to do it that way. This is sort of the same way. You're not taking numbers, but you're using the actual garment to quarter it and measure it in half. And it works fine. Now if you like it tighter in the back where it pulls more so you don't have it right up, you can actually change how your elastic is quartered so that you have it pull tighter in the back and less in the front. That's perfectly okay too. So we're going to, there we go. All right, I'm going to put in my last pin and we're going to stitch it in. You want to make sure when you're stitching that you're not, because this is the narrower elastic, that we don't cover our picot edge, because on this width, the picot edge is perfect with the edge of our stitching and makes it really easy, which is nice. So look at how pretty that's going to look. So cute. You want to watch, because we're sewing at the serger, that we do not cut off any of our elastic. It messes with the integrity of your elastic. So you want it to be right with the edge of the knife, but not cutting through it. You can really mess up this picot edge where you lose some of it if you cut it off, change the shape of your underwear. But I just want you to see how nice and stretchy that is. Look at that, and how cute that's going to look. I'm pinning this, and you can see there's some gathering there. So when you pin, you actually want to stretch it. I'm going to, like this, just enough to make it flat, and then put your pin in. Whoops. And that helps you to get this nice and even. See, you can see the little bit of gather. So when I stitch it with this new stitch, that's going to make those gathers lay nice and even. And I always start and stop at my center back, or wherever I overlapped my elastic threads. So this is what the triple zigzag looks like on my machine. And you can see that it has multiple stitches in each leg. So I'm going to leave it at its presets right now. I'm going to stitch it and see what it looks like. And if I like it, that's what we'll use on the finished garment. So I'm just not going to worry about being perfect. And you can see the multiple legs. Now, one of the reasons I do this first on a scrap is so I can see how far my needle position goes over. And you can see my needle position went right off the edge of my fabric. So I for sure need to readjust my fabric over a little bit. And here's my little picot edge. So we're going to try again. And I think I'm actually going to widen this. It may be a little closer together than I want. All right, let's get a quick look and see. Oh no, actually that looks really nice. So that's super stretchy and it lays really flat. Now if I had this stretched, I didn't stretch this elastic much at all when I was doing my practice stitches. But if I had stretched it a lot and let it go, what this does is it makes the elastic fall evenly, so you end up with a pretty little, almost not even a gather, but it makes the elastic lay in an even measured way, and it just makes it look more attractive. So this is definitely, I like the presets. So we're just going to go with that and go to the garment. The underwear are done. I'm just going to bring this up close to the camera so you can see. That's how the finished stitch looks, front and back, and it's stretchy. Now, a few things I would do differently about this pattern, and if you just see it laying here, what's one of the first things you notice is that, look at how big these legs are. You can actually see a rippling. This elastic is too big. The measurement is too big, not the actual elastic, but it had us subtract approximately 4 inches for the waist and a little less for the leg. And then when it gets stitched twice, it completely stretches it out. It just doesn't, it needs to be a smaller dimension for it to fit. This has no stretch in it now. I mean, there is stretch still, the elastic's plenty stretchy, but because it's not taking advantage of the stretch of the elastic. So to make this pattern again, I would probably take 8 inches, like it needs to be halved from what they did. The waist needs to be 8 inches smaller and the leg like 6. I'm just going to show you, this is the exact same elastic and with a much smaller measurement because it gets stitched twice. You can see how stretchy it is. Can you see how it gathers up? The leg hole's actually small. It's actually going to fit against the body and it's still really stretchy. The same with the waist. You can see the waist is smaller. Not because the pattern is smaller, but because the elastic's doing its job. So I definitely do not, and I find this often, the elastic's just not the right measurement. They tell you to cut it to. So I would cut the elastic much smaller around before sewing it. And that's just one of those, if I were to put these on today the way they are, there's no fitting in them. Like my waist is small on my body, but the waist on these elastic on these is huge. That would be too big. It would just slide right down onto my hips. So that I'm unimpressed as far as that goes. The pattern's fine. I'm very pleased with the choices that I made. I love this fabric. I would definitely choose this cotton spandex again. It's nice quality. The other thing that was not my favorite is inside the crotch here. This is open. So here's your crotch. And you have just this serged edge, and it's really short, and I don't love that either. So 2 things that were not my favorite. We're going to go ahead and do another pattern. I'm going to do this other one and make the elastic how I would do it with a much tighter elastic, and I'm going to show you a different method for how I serge it on. Look at that leg. So super cute pattern. I don't hate the pattern. I don't appreciate the measurements, and I'm definitely, this is stitched in twice. To rip this out would be misery. I think rather than taking it out to remake it, I'm just going to cut a new pair and remake them so that I could actually have a pair that I can wear. So that's my final analysis on this. The construction techniques I showed you work great. If you go to make this pattern, you might want to consider making your elastic narrower, cutting it shorter than they recommend for your size. So, all right, next week, different underwear pattern.